Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Working Copy and Narwhal. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci, the editor-in-chief of MacStories.net. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John. How's it going?
Oh, it's going really well.
Today, we're going to have two special guests on this show. We've been talking about the future of App Stories in terms of topics. And since we launched the show, we had a blog post, we shared some news on Mac Stories, and we mentioned that in our plans was the idea of telling the stories of different kinds of people in the app community. And as we were thinking about where do we want to start this, what is going to be hopefully a long series on App Stories, a name came to mind to both of us, and that was App Camp for Girls, which is this awesome program that helps middle school girls get started with app development. And it goes beyond development itself. They do design of apps, brainstorming, building, testing, programming, coding, all kinds of tasks related to programming and making apps. And we thought, what better way to talk about App Camp for Girls than to invite the co-founders of the program, MacDonald and Osten, to the show and talk about it. So thank you for being here, Jean and Gray, and welcome to App Stories.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Why don't you tell us a bit about App Camp for Girls? How did it start? Where did the idea come from? Who's it for? What's the mission? We want to hear, and our listeners want to hear directly from you. How did this happen? It seems like it's a pretty incredible thing, and tell us all about it.
I'd be happy to. So App Camp for Girls got its start at WWDC, actually. And initially in 2011, when I was there, I just, for the first time, really felt overwhelmed by the lack of anybody but men in the crowd. And I thought, there just has to be something we can do about this, something I can do about this. Well, and I tweeted it out, and I mentioned it to a couple people that, what if we could do something like Rock and Roll Camp for Girls, which is a program that started here in Portland, but make it about making apps instead of making rock songs. So, but I sort of let that idea float for a while. And then in 2012, I was pretty much ready to find people who wanted to do this with me. And serendipitously, at WWDC again, I went to the WWDC Girls Lunch meetup, and I met Gray. And I wouldn't have met, and Gray lives in Portland like I do, but we wouldn't have met probably in Portland if we hadn't met at that lunch. So it was a really great moment in App Camp history, I think. So anyway, I needed somebody. I'm not a programmer. I'm not a coder. I can do enough to be very dangerous, as Gray can tell you, but I did need to find somebody who could take what I had, which was a fairly unrealistic idea of what girls could do in 1 week with app building, and make it into a reality. And Gray was that person and got on board, and we talked about how we would do it over the course of that fall, and we just kind of jumped in feet first in the summer of 2013, and it went swimmingly. It was super. We were so excited. The girls were really into it. The volunteers were into it. Obviously, there were a lot of things we wanted to change or fix or make different, but it was a success really from day one, and that was very gratifying. But to the specifics, it's a camp program for girls who are going into 8th or 9th grade in the fall, so mostly 13 and 14-year-olds. And it's not just for girls. We also open to all transgender kids, gender fluid, gender non-binary, and underrepresented genders in the tech field, which is pretty obvious. It's not just girls or women that are missing on the scene. And we do a week of camp to show them what it could be like to be an app developer. So it's not just about coding, but designing and coming up with ideas and pitching their ideas as well.
So you're now at the 5th camp, and how's the demand been like over the past few years?
Every summer we have had camps that, we've had more interested kids than we have spaces for, and that demand is definitely there. We get one of the ways that I measure it is how many people email me to say, can we come to Portland from wherever they are to do camp this week? Because there's nothing like this where we live, and our girls or our kids really want to do this. So the demand, I wouldn't say the demand is necessarily increasing. It was very high to begin with. And I think there's just a lot more awareness now out there that there are programs like ours, and kids need stuff like this to get them into thinking about technology as a career, because it's not all about making video games. It can be all sorts of other kinds of software development that kids actually really like.
Thanks to Working Copy for supporting App Stories. Working Copy puts Git repositories on your iOS device so you can take them with you wherever you go. Not only do you get a full-fledged Git app, but with the document picker, you can access your repos from other apps. For example, we use Working Copy to collaboratively edit Markdown files at MacStories. I can edit files in my repo with Working Copy, or I can use another text editor that supports the document picker. Everything you would expect is here: cloning, editing, committing, and pushing. But here's the thing, Working Copy is not some stripped-down implementation of Git. It's got tons of advanced features too, like merging, rebasing, and cherry-picking. It's also got an elegantly designed conflict resolution tool that plays to the strengths of being on a gesture-based device. Working Copy was designed with web developers in mind too. You can preview HTML files within a repository and even load images, style sheets, and JavaScript as needed. That last bit is really handy because there's a built-in JavaScript console that shows log statements, which helps you find and fix errors in line. Working Copy is free to download and try, so you can see if you like it. If you do, there's an in-app purchase to unlock its advanced features. You can find a link to the Working Copy app in our show notes. Thanks again to Working Copy for supporting the show. Gray, this is John. A question for you about what Jean said. She said that the camp is not just about coding, it's also about design and other aspects of making iOS apps. Could you walk us through what a day at camp is like for some of the people in it?
Yeah, definitely. So during the week at camp, we put the campers in teams of 4, and they form a company together. So they're not just sitting at a computer writing code alone, they're writing code together as a group. And some of the assignments we also do, like the whole room, all the campers together. So there's a lot of collaboration, there's a lot of teamwork, there's a lot of working together. In the beginning, whenever we start talking about code, we actually have them program, we call it the gray bot or whoever's doing it, but they'll actually write up the list of steps to make a cup of tea and then execute the app and have us act that out. So they're getting up and talking and moving around and stuff. They're not just sitting in front of the computer. We also focus a lot on design and marketing and testing. So they learn all the aspects of what goes into building an app, not just the programming side of it. And they spend the whole week sort of hopping from, concept to concept. And we also have a whole lot of snacks and activity breaks. I think one thing that we've all learned as adults is you can only sit and focus for so long. And we try and make sure that they also learn that. Also, middle schoolers are a lot happier whenever you feed them snacks.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, and then we've also got a lot of workshops. So we'll have people come in and talk like specifically about design or specifically about marketing or things like that to sort of enrich their experience and have a lot of different perspectives. And then at the end of the week, we have the campers pitch their app idea, their finished app actually, to a panel of investors. So they get up and they talk about like what makes their product different and what makes it engaging and who their target audience is and how they would develop a revenue stream for the app.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. I want to hear a little bit more about the Graybot because I think I watched one time on iTunes U, I watched a Computer Science 101 class that I think was done by Harvard, where they made the students build a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and it was really funny to watch. Is that a similar type of thing that you do with the campers?
Yeah, it's actually inspired by that very idea. And we also then take it into the app. So they build a quiz app. So in addition to programming the cup of tea experiment, the first function that they write for the quiz app is sort of what happens whenever you tap a button that is selecting an answer in the quiz. You've got to figure out which button was tapped and take that value and stick it into an array and then pass that array on to the next question view controller. And then at the end of that, it all gets graded. And so it's sort of, for them, pulling things apart into individual little steps and then chaining them together, like that's not really a way that they maybe think about things normally. I think you learn to think about it like that in math and science class, but not outside of that. And so having them go through the process of like actually acting out what's happening and watching it go then helps them write the code in those little pieces. And so we'll sort of pseudocode up all of the steps, and then we'll sit them down in front of the computer and have them actually type the code that makes that stuff happen.
Oh, that's really cool. I think that's a great way to learn how to think like a programmer, because I think a lot of people don't realize how literal you have to be when you're writing computer code steps.
Yeah, it's super funny to watch them have their list and they're like, no, this is perfect. We've got it. And then you'll do something like not hand the array off to the next view controller, or like, you make a new one every time. And I think it's cool because they're all programming errors that we have when we write our own code. Or maybe you like forget to turn the stove off and you burn yourself when you're making the tea. And, that would be like throwing an exception in programming land. And so we tie all of these things together to, what would actually happen on the computer and illustrate it for them. And they get really into it because they can actually see what's going on and interact in like a story or a play.
Yeah, that is cool. Gene, I wanted to ask you about new camps. You've expanded App Camp for Girls into a number of cities over the years. What really goes into that? I mean, there's a new camp starting in Chicago this summer, and I was just wondering what that process was like.
It's an interesting and long-term process, really. I started talking to Jesse Chartier, who is the camp organizer for Chicago, in March of 2016 when I was in Chicago for CocoConf. And we've been talking about it throughout the year. And in fact, we had one of the Chicago volunteers come last summer to Portland to volunteer so that she could get the experience of volunteering at camp and see how it works. Because I do think some people have a hard time believing we get as much done as we do in 1 week. But when you see it, it all works together and it happens. But for a new location, there has to be an organizer or ideally a team of organizers who are ready to take the lead on finding a location, finding volunteers, and being willing to manage the process on the location's end. And that's a big commitment. In fact, will be our 5th summer, as you said, and we'll have done 20 camps, I think, by the end of this summer. And everyone, is different, and everyone has its specific needs. So it's not a cookie cutter program. Unfortunately, we can't just put it in a box and ship it to people and say, go do this camp. And one of the things we're doing as we've reached our 5th summer is we've engaged in a strategic planning process to look at where App Camp is going and how we can best get there. And the planning committee has been really great. So it's a committee of volunteer parents and teachers and programmers, not Gray and myself. We're getting the perspectives of App Camp supporters outside of our group that puts App Camp on. And one of the things that's become very clear is that because the camp has so many requirements, there's got to be people who can program, people who can help kids program. There's got to be all this expensive equipment, the schedule that has all of these activities plus breaks and snacks and workshops and a field trip. It's very labor intensive. And so we'll be looking at how things go in Chicago this summer to help us map out the best way to go to new locations in 2018 and beyond. So it basically, yes, it takes a small team that's really committed and has the ability to kind of consistently during the year keep their process moving forward, because there are a lot of moving parts. But I have to say the Chicago team's awesome. I was just there, as you know, a couple weeks ago to work with Jesse and check out the location, which is amazing. I'm really excited about the Chicago location, and I met a big bunch of the team who are great. And so it's firing on all cylinders as far as I can see. But like I said, it does take it does take a lot of work, and somebody who has that kind of dual skills, like somebody like Jesse or myself, who can work with programmers and coders even if they're not a programmer themselves.
Thanks to Narwhal for sponsoring App Stories. If you use Reddit on iOS, you should be using Narwhal. Narwhal features fast gesture-based interactions built specifically to take advantage of modern iOS features. It also has a unique integrated content and comment screen that makes reading posts a breeze. What's more, you can customize Narwhal to make it your own, with content filters, custom app icons, shortcuts, and ways to view Reddit posts. There's a link to Narwhal on the App Store in the show notes. Thanks again to Narwhal for supporting the show.
I wanted to ask both of you, how would you say that App Camp has changed over the past few years? What are some of the changes that you can see from the first edition now to this year, some of the underlying evolution or changes that the organization has gone through?
Well, I think Gray could answer that in particular when it comes to the curriculum, because that has definitely evolved over time. And this summer, especially, you were coming to some exciting new stuff. So I'd like to hand that one to Gray.
It's been really, really neat to watch the curriculum sort of evolve and to watch the way camp goes evolve. It's sort of been something that every camp, like actually a lot of times in the middle of camp, as we're watching the campers learn and take in the information, we've, shifted the way that we explain things or the way that we talk about things or even the way we execute building the apps as a whole. I think one of my favorite examples of that was, I think it was the second summer in Portland, we were going over the code for the beginning of the quiz app, and they just you could tell all the kids were trying real hard, but they just couldn't quite see what was going on or visualize what was going on. And so I run into the break room. I have this epiphany of how to explain it. And I tell Kelly Gamont, I need 4 packs of goldfish and a backpack. And Kelly is like, what? And I'm like, just do it. And I was like, I need you. And so we go back into the classroom, and I was trying to explain this function that I was talking about earlier, where they tap the first answer button in the quiz, and then it has to do some stuff before it can show the next question. And I start acting it out, and all the lights go on in their heads. And we had already done the cup of tea exercise as a way to talk about thinking about things in this sort of step-like fashion. But then when we applied it to actual code that we were writing, all the light bulbs went on. And then they're all, they went from just deer in headlights and quiet to excited and throwing out different ideas. And, well, don't forget about this part. And what about this part? And no. They're going to drop the backpack. And so it's cool because then they're also talking about these parts of the quiz with the metaphors that we've made. So each button was a snack. And the array was a backpack. And so then as the week goes on and we're talking about how you grade the quiz at the end, or how you clear out the responses whenever you go to take the quiz again, they're like, oh, you have to empty the backpack before you can take the quiz again, otherwise it'll still have the old snacks in it. And so they get into it. And so I think, my favorite part about that is that not just with the Portland camp, but with Seattle and Vancouver and all of our other locations, the way that we've approached showing things to the campers has sort of shifted over time to speak to that individual group, and then it's added or contributed to the next summer to have more things in our tool belt. This summer we're going to be adding some stuff for Swift Playgrounds that I'm really excited about.
Oh, really? You guys are going to use the iPad app to teach Swift code, I imagine, because I for some reason I always thought it's impossible for this program to implement the iPad in the curriculum just because you cannot actually create apps on the iPad. So I assume they're going to have to use MacBooks or in general just desktop computers. But it's you tell me that you're going to use Swift Playground. So tell me more about that, because I'm really, as the iPad person here, I'm really curious. I'm really curious to hear that.
I'm super excited about it. So the challenges that you outlined are definitely real. And I spent a lot of time sort of waffling back and forth about how we could get the iPads into the curriculum. Because the feedback that we get from all the kids is we really want to code more. We want to code more. We want to write more code. And it's just not, you can't have that sort of collaborative group experience if each kid has a computer and is buried in it. But with the iPads, it's a little less siloed. So what I ended up sort of settling on, and we're going to test this summer in Portland, and then assuming it'll go well, we'll do it at all the camps. We're going to start by writing a sort of interactive playground together from the start. So they'll open up a new one, and we together will talk about integers and strings and functions and classes. And at the end of that, as an example of how to write a function that accepts parameters and has a return value, we'll write a function that adds two numbers together. And they'll learn about code refactoring. So we'll start with two numbers hard-coded in. So it's just a function that adds 2 plus 4. And then it'll take parameters to make those numbers change. And so we'll sort of iterate through that. And at the end, they'll have a finished function that, like I said, has parameters and a return value. And then from there, I've sort of built a hollowed out empty calculator app that runs in playgrounds. And so the campers, the interface will already be built, and they'll make the calculator add, subtract, multiply, and divide in playgrounds.
And this is all done on the iPad?
Yeah, this is all done on the iPad. And it works because the current version of Playgrounds supports UIKit. So you can actually throw a view controller in there and have an interactive UI. Now, all that has to get written in code, and we don't really want to focus on them writing constraints and stuff like that. We want them to write things that they're really going to enjoy writing. So that piece will already be handled, and they'll be writing the stuff that makes the calculator do its 4 functions.
Nice.
And so then before we did that on the computer, so they had to share one computer between 4 kids. Now each camper will get to write all of the code that goes into the calculator app. And then once they're done writing all the code, we'll move them over to the computer. They'll have the same app on the computer, and then they'll build the user interface and get to do some design with that. So we're sort of breaking it up into steps, making it more iterative. And I think that's also more reflective of what it's like to write software as a professional. You don't just build the whole thing already figured out. You've got to sort of iterate on that. And that starts with building little pieces and then stacking them together like Lego blocks.
Awesome. So I assume at the end of the summer, as usual, there's going to be a compendium of all of the apps that the kids have put together.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And it's going to be on the App Store.
Yes.
That's great. Having this sort of dual setup of using the iPad for sort of a more collaborative sort of group and then moving to the MacBook, it seems like the best of both worlds, really. You're going to teach to the kids and they can work together on the iPad, which can be on a desk and multiple kids can look at the screen, and then each one can individually work on the MacBook. That's a really fantastic idea. Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you. We're really excited about it.
Yeah, that sounds really great. I wanted to ask how people can get involved with App Camp for Girls, because I know, as Gene said, obviously these camps are a ton of work and it's expensive. There's a lot of equipment. There's all sorts of overhead to support in putting on a camp. How can people help out if they want to?
Well, there are a number of ways. We have an amazing community of supporters, as I think you know, and App Camp wouldn't be what it is today if it were not for thousands of mostly people in the Apple community, lots and lots of indie developers and Apple product users and your average geeks that we know have donated money when we've done a campaign, or some people donate monthly. We have a few sponsors, corporate sponsors that are really awesome and have come back year after year to give us kind of support that is now making it possible for us to move to a new level in terms of a nonprofit organization. We hired our first executive director this year, which means I don't have to do the accounting and the taxes and all the back end of the organization anymore, and I can focus on being the leader of the board, which is basically the leader of the fundraising. So fundraising is a really important part of what we do, and every donation is very much appreciated. The big corporate sponsors, the people who give us $5 a month, that's super. And I will just plug right now at WWDC, there will be a benefit concert again this year put on by James Dempsey and the Breakpoints on Wednesday night. So I want everybody to save that date. And tickets should go on sale soon. And that has become our biggest fundraiser. Every year done something at WWDC that has been put on by other people in our benefit. And every year the amount that we raise doubles. So it's pretty impressive, like I said, what this community can do when they're behind something. We can also use your help getting the word out to potential campers and volunteers, and also companies. If you think your company might be a good sponsor for App Camp for Girls, you should definitely get in touch with me. Talk to anybody about how we work with people who want to invest in our program. And then in terms of volunteering, I think it's important to note that we've always been the staff on site at the camp. So all of the organizers and the project team managers and the various volunteers and the developers have been, we have this commitment to presenting role models of an alternative to what today's tech business is like. So we don't have any cis men volunteers on staff, with the exception of an occasional photographer or videographer, but not in a teaching or mentoring role. And we have this panel at the end of the week, the investors panel. That's all women or transgender, open as it is to non-cis men. I don't know a better word to put to it. But there's a lot of back-end stuff where we could use help. And I know Chicago in particular has a great bunch of guys who are helping out in some behind-the-scenes ways with the organization and designing the collateral for, the posters and the banners and things like that. That kind of volunteer work is definitely very welcome. Moving equipment is a big need that we always have. And so, I always have this idea of I'll start the guild of App Camp movers, and that will be a way that men can get involved as well. So those are some of the ways people can support App Camp for Girls, and just getting the word out like you guys are with App Stories is essential. So thank you very much for taking so much time with us.
Oh, sure. And thank you for being with us today. I know Federico and I both went to the James Dempsey and the Breakpoints event last year at WWDC.
Yes.
And it's a lot of fun. So if you're going to be in San Jose, don't miss that at all. We had a great time last year. So be there. And thank you again for joining us for App Stories.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks again.
Well, that's it for this week, folks. Thanks again to our sponsors, Working Copy and Narwhal, and a big thanks to Jean MacDonald and Gray Osten of App Camp for Girls for joining us on our first App Stories interview. Also, thanks for listening today. App Stories is off to a great start, and we really appreciate it. If you're listening on the web, consider clicking one of the subscribe buttons below the player so you get the new episodes delivered to you automatically and for free. And if you like the show, we'd appreciate it if you would share App Stories with your friends. You can find both of us writing on Mac Stories and Club Mac Stories. Federico is at Vitici on Twitter. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHN VOORHEES. All right. Thanks, Federico.
Ciao, John.